Hey guys, today I'm making a card using the new, or well, I should say newish, stamp set from My Favorite Things called Lucky. And I picked this up last month. I believe this was part of their February release. But anyways, I'm stamping the images on watercolor paper using Stays on ink because I'm going to be doing some watercoloring with this Prang Glitter Watercolor set. And this is just one of those little budget sets that you get in the kids section at the craft store. And I'm adding water to several of the colors and mixing them up. And I mixed together the light green and the dark green that are in the palette because both of the colors looked really pale. In the palette itself, the colors look really dark and saturated, but when you start applying them to paper, you realize right away that they're not quite as dark as they appear. The other thing that I noticed right away is that you have to work your paintbrush in each of the colors quite a bit to get that glitter to lift or be suspended in your paint. It seems like the longer you let it sit, the more glittery the paint becomes. I let the paint air dry and I realized right away that it was too light. I just didn't like the color it had turned out to be. So I went back and added the darker color in the palette just to one side of the four-leaf clover so it has a little bit of shading. I decided that I wanted the horseshoe to be a gray color, but this particular watercolor set doesn't have gray or black in it. So I colored a black marker, a black Tim Holtz distress marker on a block, and I'm using my watercolor brush to dilute the ink down so that it's a light gray color, and I used it to color in the horseshoe. Unfortunately, this meant that my horseshoe wasn't glittery and I could have went back over it with a Wink of Stella pen, but I decided just to leave it as is. Once all the watercoloring finally dried, I cut each of the pieces apart because I'm going to be die cutting them in my Big Shot. But before I do my die cutting, I'm going to add faces to each of the images. This particular stamp set comes with several little faces that you can add to the different shapes, but I decided to just use the little winking face for the horseshoe and the little blushing face for the two four-leaf clovers. To make the little cheeks stand out a little bit more, I just colored them in with a worn lipstick distress marker, and I didn't do any blending or anything like that just because the two little circles are very small. These particular images would be very easy to fussy cut, but I do have the coordinating dies that match the stamp set, so I die cut each of the images that I colored out, and I'm also going to die cut a additional piece, or actually two pieces of watercolor paper. One is going to be the backdrop for my card, and the second piece is going to be for the inside of my card. I'm going to stamp my sentiment onto the background of my card, but before I do that, I'm going to use the glitter watercolor paint set and just go back and forth across the background. And this background is where all of my little images are going to sit, and I just wanted it to look like it was quickly brushed in with brush strokes. So I just went back and forth quickly, and it kind of sloppy, to be honest, but that was the look I was going for. Before I committed to stamping my sentiment down, I placed all the images on to make sure they were all going to fit with the sentiment in place. And I'm using my Misty tool to go ahead and stamp my sentiment with Stays on ink because this is watercolor paper and it's textured. So I may have to stamp it twice, and the Misty tool makes it easier for me to restamp without feeling like I may mess up the sentiment or make it blurry. I attached all my little die cut shapes down using dimensional adhesive, and I didn't double layer anything. I just made sure that the adhesive wasn't in a spot where it was going to land on top of another piece. Then I moved on to prepping my card base, and for my card base I'm using a piece of green cardstock that was originally an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that I cut in half, and I'm scoring at the 4 1/4 mark using my paper trimmer. This particular cardstock is from a My Favorite Things sampler pack, so I'm not exactly sure what the color is, but if I figure out exactly what it is, I will link it down below. And around the edges, I'm just using the green paint that is in the palette to go along the edges. And I'm not painting in the entire card base, I'm just painting the edges that you'll see after I attach that other panel to the front of this card. Now that the front of my card is done, I'm going to move on to the inside of the card, and I'm just using a little bit of adhesive to attach the rectangular die cut piece that I cut earlier to the inside of the card. And the reason I chose to attach a piece of paper was simply so that it was easier to read when I fill this card out to give to someone. And I typically don't decorate the inside of my cards, but I decided to go ahead and stamp that same horseshoe again and color him in using the gold paint that's from the paint set. So here's a quick look at the final product. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.